Welcome to episode 4, where we're talking about working better with software developers, Waterfall, and building community with Erin Clark. For those of you who don't know, Erin, we actually did an event together back in November last year. It was a CTO AMA, or Ask Me Anything, where she wowed the crowd with all her awesome insights and lived experiences. And we're going to dig into a bit of that, but a different side of Erin as well. She's also the founder of Stories Unseen, the Exchange Collective, and a big helper in Morning Startup as well, among, I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that you do that I haven't even captured. So, welcome to the episode 4 of Startup Today. How you going?
Great. Thanks for having me, Matt. Super exciting topic.
That's right. That's good. Yeah, we're very fortunate to have you. Do you want to do a bit of a quick intro about you and especially about what maybe you've been working on recently?
Yeah. So as Matt mentioned, my main hustle is I run a technology consultancy, which is really focused on helping organizations adopt emerging technology. And as part of that, running that consultancy, we practice what we preach and run a few different startups. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Stories Unseen. So we do self-guided walking and driving tours. And I also, alongside my husband, have a hobby farm in the wheat belt, which we rent out as a farm stay. And we also experiment with some really fun things around IoT and commercializing bush tucker. So that's my passion project. But yeah, I've spent a long time in the tech industry, and I've always sat between technology and the people who use it because cut my teeth as all things. So everyone's got these fascinating backgrounds. I started my career in the media industry.
Awesome. And you've been a CTO, project manager, as well as obviously startup founder before
Product
that.
owner, business analyst, project manager. I
Yep,
think
yep,
I've
yep.
worn pretty much every hat. Currently doing a quite large architecture project that is at the intersection of people, process, and technology for a major university. So I've got my finger in all kinds of different things.
Awesome. Well, I hope we can touch on some of that today. And before we like dig deep, what's one thing that, perhaps people don't know about you that you're comfortable sharing?
So I'm an open book, but the one that I promise is a truth, as I said, I've played two truths and one lie many times as a
Yep.
facilitator, is I've been to Malaysia over 30 times.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Well, Malaysia is a great country if you haven't visited. I've been there twice. Yeah, but 30 times, that's an
Yeah.
achievement. I think I've been to Japan 16 times, but I lived there 8 years, so maybe I don't know if that counts. Um, anyway, so for people watching in the audience, feel free to ask questions as we go, especially if it's thematic in line with what we're chatting about, sorry. Otherwise, you'll have a chance at the end to dig deep into Erin's past as well. So let's get into it. All right. So I think the first thing we're looking at is working better with developers. And maybe we'll touch on your past a little bit. How did you learn to work, let's say, or improve, um, you know, working, let's say, between non-technical teams and technical teams?
I think baptism of fire. So I started working on tech projects. The first, and this is gonna age me awkwardly. Is the first project that I managed was a transition for a media monitoring company from
Mm,
VHS and audio tapes to digital.
wow.
Um, and we were rolling out this technology was housed in ABC radio stations across Australia. So for me, I it was literally a baptism of fire. It was like, oh, you're a young person, you know about tech, don't you? So off you go. So I pretty much learnt the wrong way of how to interact with developers as a young 20 something. Um,
Mhm.
is that one of the things that took me a long time in my career to understand is that as someone who comes to projects from a product or a people side of things is to really have an appreciation and respect for developers
Mm.
and understanding that the way that their brains are wired, their passion for technology can be quite different to how people come. If you come across as a people person or you might have a process brain, is thinking about how do you take that and translate that into something that somebody can then develop, because it has to be something that's binary. So if you roll in with these requirements that are like, on a Monday we want to do this, but we've got some weird edge cases. Oh, and can you do this? 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 Oh, and I also need it to do this. The most important thing I think is to really challenge and understand the requirements. So before you've started talking with a developer about what you need, is really thinking about how can you have it as the most simple process, as the most minimum viable product is a thing that we
Yeah.
use a lot in our industry, but really, really have a solid challenge of what you're asking for, because developers are fantastic humans and they will race off and start developing. But the more that you can interrogate and use prototypes and other ways of testing requirements before you start coding, the better.
Yep. Yeah, awesome. So in like building, what about building relationships with developers? Like I'm sure as a non-technical founder that I meet almost every week, and they want to find a dev to help them, bring
Yeah.
their MVP or vision to life. What's kind of, where can they start to not only build a relationship, I guess, but also start to improve the working relationship too?
I think it's about curiosity and thinking about what is it that a developer actually does. So obviously, as a non-technical person, you're not going to tell them how to code all those types of things,
Hmm.
but it's actually having an understanding of how the software is built.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is a quite often a joke that gets around people working in projects where developers say it works on my machine. And so what that means is that it's understanding when you're asking a developer for something, are you asking for something that they can prototype that might work in a dev environment? Or are you asking for something that is customer ready and completely robust? So
Mm.
one of the big things I've found working with developers is having a really good handle in conversations with developers about what's the level of expectation of quality of what we're building, because that's where I think a lot of things get lost in translation. Is
Yep.
it something particularly for early stage founders? You just want something really fast and cheap, because that's the runway that you've got to test a particular aspect of your product with market. But it goes two way as well, is understanding that if you're asking for something fast and cheap, that it's not necessarily going to be good. So having that relationship with developers to say, look, if I'm going to ask you for something fast and cheap, I then know as a founder that that's going to be really difficult to support. So that understanding of the software development life cycle and that
Yep.
relationship with, hey, if I want something fast and I want something cheap, you as a founder appreciating that the developer is going to take some shortcuts, or right size it, so that you're really clear that what you're going to receive will do this, but it might not be completely scalable for your future growth.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I love that. I think, what you've initially said, like the curiosity side of things, just being, eternally curious. But I guess, that MBA, the lived experience of a founder is kind of like that practical MBA course that you experience, which will help you understand like the software side or the architecture side and the kind of the development process as well. So just being on it, working with, it's okay to make mistakes, and I think it's good to be upfront about that too. If you haven't worked with the dev before, just tell that to the dev. Just say, hey, be easy on me. I'll try to be easy on you, and we can work together. One thing, I've always thought was a great approach is giving more ownership, especially if you want the dev to be a bit more product driven. So, what's your thoughts on autonomy and giving, um, I don't want too much freedom, but kind of discretionary power about how they deliver a solution to a developer.
I'm all about discretionary power for developers,
Yep.
because uh, they're the person who's coding it, they're the person that's doing the work. So my approach is very much, particularly in those early stages, is being really clear on what your product roadmap is.
Mm.
And this I think we've kind of alluded to in the background of this conversation of the differences between working in a fully agile environment and a waterfall environment.
Yep.
But having that, there's so many developers who I've worked with who have said to me, look, if I had have known the full product roadmap early on and where we were headed, I would have built this completely differently. And I
Yep.
apologize to those developers. Like sometimes you're not always going to know to start
Sure.
up what
Sure.
your product roadmap is, because you'll get
Yep.
customer feedback and you're like, sorry guys, I said the product roadmap was this, but actually we're going over here now because that's the feedback that we've got from market. But the
Mm.
more transparency that you can give them, um, and also being able to prioritize, because I think that's the other temptation as a founder. You've got this vision in your head, you're like, I want all these things, I want all these features, I want this two-sided marketplace, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. So being able to give them the big vision of where you're headed,
Yep.
but then also to say, this is the vision, but these are my expectations. And that's where being able to say, okay, this is where we're headed, but this is the chunk that we're working on, and this is what success looks like for this chunk.
Yeah, okay. No, that's great. I think like one thing that I think historically Techline did work with non-technical founders, and we stopped, and now we're looking at it again. And I think what we're doing differently this time is we're helping them think about, well, first of all, we're pushing back if they haven't done enough research or they haven't done enough market validation. But when they are ready to move ahead, like it's thinking about initially, still spending the time doing the UI UX, the wireframes in Figma, but also really getting clear on the requirements. So it's assigning someone to them to work with them, partner with them to build the technical scope of the project. And so then you've got the visual element, plus you've got all the like the details kind of behind the scenes, so that then it's a lot easier to resource or like build the product roadmap from there. So yeah, that's one thing that we're
Yeah.
trying to do just to make it easier for non-technical founders, I think.
And I think the skill that you're touching on there is business analysis. So shout
Yeah,
out to all
that's
the
right.
business analysts, yeah, business analysts. So,
Yeah,
a much forgotten skill that we don't, and it's kind of fascinating because we don't really talk about business analysis much in the startup community.
yeah.
It's not really a thing that we talk about, but in the corporate world, business analysis is like the jam. It's the thing that everyone's really focused on, and we have quite a professional practice around that. And what you've just touched on is that importance of bringing those business analysis skills.
Mm,
Um, so founders don't necessarily need to be super technical, and in some ways, it's actually more powerful for them not to be, because then they can have better relationships with developers because they're not telling them how to code. And what those business analysis focus, as you said, writing all your requirements down, it really helps those manage those relationships with developers. And one of the things that I was sort of rambling on about before is about quality.
right, right.
Is if we put on our business analysis hat and use our business analysis words,
Yep.
what that structured discipline does is it talks about functional. So
Hmm.
what do I want the system to do? Like
Mm,
clicky buttons, all that kind of stuff. So wireframes, however you visualize those requirements. But what business analysis, that structured approach, also does is it creates a conversation about non-functional requirements. So that whole idea of how good does it be, and so it really starts to tease out those conversations with developers about how we're going to test this,
yep.
particularly for stories unseen,
Mm,
is a large chunk of it's codeless. We work really closely with, we have an amazing platform provider. So
hmm.
if we need, we work with them around features and those types of things. but we do an insane amount of testing because it's both a Android and Apple app.
Yeah, yeah,
It means and it works on iPads as well. So we have to work across an insane number of devices to make sure that stuff's fully tested. And I think that is when we start thinking about founders and requirements and all those types of things, is it's thinking about working your developer not just on getting something that works on the developer's machine, but how you're going to work with the developer across that whole software development life cycle.
yeah. And you raise a few things you raise, like especially the importance of having, I don't know if it's a dedicated like QA or a test analyst on the team, but just doing the testing, like finding
Step
the
one.
debugging, finding the, doing the edge cases, like just being real thorough. Like, we've seen a number of startups that didn't have a thorough process in place, and then a tester came in and really helped them build that out. And, as a result, they're not releasing buggy code anymore. Or at least they have, covered a lot more of their bases. So yeah, it's good that you raised that.
And I think
You just
it touches on, yes,
yeah,
um, in our industry, there's a lot of conversations about continuous deployment, so the acronym
mm,
CI/CD,
yeah,
and
yeah,
getting things to production faster and pipelines and all those types of things. And you're saying about testers, I think that's for startups to be really aware that sometimes you need to slow down to speed up,
mm,
and that doing lots of deployments and lots of testing and those types of things every time you deploy something, that's an overhead for everyone in the team. And that's definitely one of the big lessons that I've learned, particularly when you're in a startup with a short runway and you've got customers and it's a high stress environment. So the temptation is always um, to push something in production. And I think hopefully we've also those dumpster fire memes
right, right,
um, of yeah, we'll just test it in production. But it's really as a founder to think about that whole process, because once something's out and if it's a defect that's unforgivable, particularly in your early stages, if it's one of your first customers, it can be very difficult to come back from that.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. So you did cover a little bit about Agile and Waterfall. Maybe for people that don't know, especially even though you're pro Waterfall, what's the difference? And
I
yeah,
interpret
what
for Dan.
you want?
So this is Agile and this is Waterfall. Um, like all jokes aside, I often think about Agile. So Agile is the idea that you do everything in sprints, and in textbook Agile, the idea is you have a list of things that you want to get developed. That goes to the developer. The list of things that you want developed is ordered by most important to least important. So must, should, could have.
Mhm.
And then that's the thing that the developer works off. And so you catch up with them every day. So not detailed requirements or any of those types of things. You're checking in with the developer every day to say, okay, how does this look right? Does this look right? Does this look right?
Right.
And the idea is at the end of the sprint, you've got a working product, which sounds great, right? The idea that you don't have to come up with super detailed requirements, developer just gets cracking, and you end up with a working product at the end of the agreed sprint, whether it's a week or a fortnight.
Yeah.
Um, but and it works really well for some product types and some relationships. But the challenge is, as a startup, you've only got a really short amount of cash or runway or whatever you want to call it. So if something the developer might spend time on something that you really just don't need because something got lost in communication.
Hmm.
It's also a lot of time for the developer, for the founder or whoever the product owner is who's working with the developer, because you're not writing things down. It means that you need one person in your organization who is really confident about what needs to be built. I've come across very few organizations who are comfortable to empower one person and just one
Mm.
person to work directly with a developer, and make all the big decisions. So that's
Right.
something to really think about, is if you're going to go down the agile route, you have to have somebody who is empowered as the product owner to work closely with the developer. And there's no guarantee at the end that you're going to get a working product,
Yep.
because of the way that those arrangements are structured. Is it's very high risk as a founder. If you're using that type of approach, you might get to the end and there's no guarantee that you'll have something in market, and that's your runway gone.
Right.
Do you want
So,
waterfall?
yeah. Yeah,
um,
waterfalls like this, no, not like
Oh, what
this.
a night. Well, I'm kind of picturing software. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, software development life cycle. So the idea is we sort of talking about agile is you do these sprints and you sort of circle back through and you circle back through and then you end up with something at the end. So you're constantly sort of planning, doing, checking throughout. The idea of waterfall is you go away and spend a lot of time working through what you think you need. So when we were
Mm.
talking about, here's my product roadmap, here's my stages, here's the features that I need, this is the output, or the thing that I need built, to which is going to be the next stage of the journey. And then what that waterfall approach enables you to do is have some really good estimation conversations up front with developers. And not that estimation doesn't happen with Agile, but what waterfall enables you to do is, like, if you've got a budget of $5, and you've got particular features that might cost, in your list, there's a $4 feature and there's a $10 feature,
Mm.
you can have those trade-off conversations early. And you can also talk about, well, this feature that's only 50 cents, we can bang that in there because that's actually really easy to do.
Right.
So when you've got a very fixed budget, I find waterfall, those upfront conversations with developers around estimation can be really helpful, because in Agile, you just kind of, you're doing your estimation based on the number of sprints that you can afford.
Yep.
Whereas in waterfall, you're having upfront conversations about, hey, this is my shopping list. What can I afford to build? Those conversations, and this is, we're sort of touching on some of the experience, because what you're really starting to lean on is the ability to have really good conversations with developers around estimation, and have that understanding that some developers will be really pessimistic and go, nah, it's going to be like this expensive, and then they'll start developing and it'll come back and it'll be a lot cheaper.
Mm.
Whereas other developers you work with are very optimistic, and they'll say, look, it'll only take a week, and she'll be right, mate. We've totally got this. I've never heard that before. 4 weeks later, you're like
Yeah.
sweating, going,
Yeah.
where is it? Where is it? So that's where getting to understand, with the development team that you're working with, are they optimistic or are they pessimistic when they're giving you estimates? And being really clear, like if you're building in contingency, so like you might have a hidden stash of cash, or you might have some extra wiggle room in terms of dates, is being really careful about not wanting to push them absolutely to the edge
Yeah.
of what's possible. So you don't want to stretch them too far, but
Mm.
you do want to encourage them to work within that startup type mindset.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, for anyone listening, just making that what is it, request again. If you want to ask any questions, feel free to ask them as we go. We're taking questions, especially if they're based on the topic at hand. So is there a fine balance between the two, or like what is it? Like a hybrid model that works in all of this chaos?
I
Where do
think,
you?
yeah,
Hmm.
it's very project specific. Try that again.
Hmm.
Um, and it really comes down to the context in which the product that you're building. So, for example, if you're building for a large, so if you're a startup building for, say, a large multinational, the way that you're going to build that is going to be quite different because of the level of quality, and it's going to need to be penetration tested.
Yep.
It's going to have to go through a whole pile of checks and balances. So the way that you would manage something like that would be very standards driven, very robust, because you know that the tires of something like that is going to be kicked over and over and over again.
Sure.
Um, before it sees the light of day. Whereas if you're an early stage founder building something to test with a market and the product doesn't hold, say, personally identifiable information, because that's the other thing to really think about, is if you're holding if you're doing anything to do with financial transactions, personally identifiable information, anything like that, your cost and how robust your solution needs to be is going to be exponential.
Correct.
Whereas if in your early stages you can make sure that you're not holding those types of information,
Yeah.
it will make that development process a lot easier. So
Mm.
you can work with your developers in a quite an informal way, and you'll need a lot less documentation and support that comes out the other end, because it's more of just a small test with a small group of people.
Sure. Okay. That's good, I think. I mean, I know from my days of just corporate world, yeah, most of the time it was always agile. It was always, basically prioritizing the feature that you wanted to add to the platform. Going fighting every other department because you wanted yours to be the best. Uh, it's not such a structured conversation too when it's you and the technical co-founder or you and the developer. So yeah, like I don't think there's one strict model that you need to follow, but yeah, having clear requirements definitely can help. Having a clear roadmap definitely can help, and just also just being upfront with the dev, being curious, trusting in their work or giving them some autonomy, and then go fast to go slow. I think that's some good points that we've kind of raised so far. Let's move on. So, you did mention a little bit about documentation. Do you want to talk about, like, in the startup world, documentation is really handy, especially like a dev falls off or, stops working, you go find another one, they can pick things up quite easily. When you're building early, what's the balance you take between documentation? Like, how much do I document? How much do I skip because I should build and get this out to market first? What's your thoughts there?
It comes back to my boring BA hat again of talking about functional and non-functional requirements. It really depends on how long you want the solution to last.
Mm,
So if it's a proof of concept or a prototype or all those types of things where if you're okay to lose it, if that particular thing disappeared overnight,
hmm.
uh, would that cause you problems? I would pretty much have no documentation,
Yep.
um, because or it might be some solutions because they've been what do we call it now, vibe coded.
Yeah.
um, uh, you've got to be some solutions have been built so fast that you could never properly support and maintain them, like the developers have literally coded in such a way that it would be very difficult for someone else to pick that project up and run with it. And as a founder, I'm learning to be okay with that, because not all, sometimes it's actually faster for, depending on the nature of what we're talking about and what it is,
Mm,
um, it can be faster for someone just to to do it from scratch a second time,
Yep.
rather than try and make sense of spaghetti code that someone else has written.
Or
Particularly if
hasn't
it's
written.
something that's involved, spaghetti code, because
Yeah.
it's just the nature of these things, because particularly in startups, you're constantly testing and experimenting, which doesn't make for clean, tidy code.
Mm.
And I apologize to all of the tech founders, all the developers I've worked with, about that constant tension between, do we build more features or do we spend some time working down our tech debt?
Mm.
Um, and so just being really aware that you need to give developers time to work on these things, documentation, working down tech debt, that kind of stuff, if you want to be able to maintain it and support it. If you don't have, it's really understanding the risk and the trade-off between the two. If you've got, really strong service level agreements with customers, then you need to be building documentation time into
Mm.
every project that you do. Whereas if you're just putting something out there and seeing how the universe feels about it, you would be probably writing it on the back of a napkin while you're sitting in the pub.
Right.
I've actually done. So it's really just always coming back to what's the quality of what we're trying to build.
Yep.
Because if it's something that needs to be super robust, because we've got service level agreements, we've got personally identifiable information, and it's got to be squeaky clean and super secure, I would be really thinking about every time that you release new features, is building documentation and sort of tech debt into your estimates. Those upfront conversations that you're having is not just how long will it take us to build it, but
Mm.
how long will it take us to build it, test it, release it, document it, and make sure that it will make sense for anyone else who needs to maintain it in the future.
One thing that you just reminded me of. I was speaking to a fractional product manager the other day, and she said that the role of developers is gonna, because of vibe coding, the role of developer is gonna change from developer to assembler. And so in the hope that the developer, you hope, understands like the infrastructure or the architecture behind a given product, or hopefully they've designed it themselves. They can now use AI to, generate the code, and then it's just a matter of assembling it, putting it in the right places to build a product. And so the process is so much more efficient to bring something together. How, again, if we come back to the point about how robust the security is or how scalable it is, questionable, but especially initially when you're building out, who cares prototype, or like initial MVP. What's your thoughts about this kind of shift away for the developer? Um,
I don't think of things as a shift. I always think of them as an evolution.
Evolution, sorry. Yeah. Wrong choice of word.
Really cool point, because a lot of people think of it as this complete shift, or AI is
Mm.
completely changing everything. But I remember having, let's call them debates with developers about using frameworks.
Yeah.
Because using frameworks 5, 6 years ago
Right.
was, some developers are like, no, can't, like, don't want to touch it, like, I don't know what. The same things that we're hearing now about vibe coding was, no, I can't use this off the shelf widget. I can't do this. I've got to, completely, I don't know what's in it. Those conversations that I remember having 5, 6 years ago, just feel like the same conversations that we're having now about vibe
Right.
coding.
Yeah.
So I find that really fascinating, that it's, we adapted to that a few years ago, and now these conversations about vibe coding feel eerily similar.
Mm.
And I was reading a tech founder who exited their business, an article with them a few years ago, and their main takeaway was they wished that they'd taken more shortcuts with their development. And
Mm,
that's when you're
okay.
thinking about working with developers more. Developers rightfully take pride in their code and what they do. And as a founder, it can, you want to respect that and those types of things. But sometimes what she was saying is that they just went through their runway way too fast
Yeah.
because of that purist concept of needing to have everything super robust, everything done from scratch. And it was just really interesting seeing that perspective because it's something that doesn't get talked about as much as it should.
Hmm. Well, I think like a few people have said this to me recently. Like AI is not going to replace jobs. I think we're smart enough to evolve with the evolution of tech. So we'll just find another way to turn it into a different role or an evolved version of a role. Like the CTO will never, I think, cease to exist. It'll always be there. The founder will be there. Sales will be there. It's just how you work with tech. And if you're not riding that wave, if you're not um, familiar or exposed to it now, start using it so that you can not stay with the times, but at least say that you can understand how the tools can help you, or are a productivity lever you can pull just to help boost how you're leveraging tech. So yeah, I want to explore a little bit more about what you're doing now. So I don't know what you want to talk about first, either the Exchange Collective or Stories Unseen, and especially like from your point of view as a founder, and building platform or like working with a platform provider. What you know, just choose one that you want to talk about and maybe some lessons learned along the way or whatever you feel like sharing.
Um, I'll talk about stories unseen. I always
Okay.
joke, I very rarely talk about the work that we do for the Exchange Collective,
Okay.
not because it's super secret, but just because it's boring.
Okay.
Uh, and it's not the type of thing that I think a lot of people can relate to, but the work that who wants to talk about asset management systems, really?
True.
Um, uh, yeah, so Stories Unseen, as I mentioned, offers self-guided walking and driving tours. And where Stories Unseen came from was my husband and I had the genius idea to start a tourism business at the end of COVID, because why wouldn't you? So it seemed like a good idea at the time. And
Yeah.
where Stories Unseen started was I had a gap between one project starting and another one finishing.
Okay.
So, and we'd been wanting to do another startup for a while. So I set myself the goal of going from idea to app store in 30 days, and did it.
Nice.
And
Well done.
yeah, and I think one of the biggest learnings, because I know there's team codeless, team not codeless, and lots of conversations around that, and it's evolving because vibe coding, I think, is that kind of middle ground between completely codeless and the step in between. But what has made us be able to scale a codeless platform is having the absolute right tech vendor. And I think that's where, working with people like TechOn becomes really important, is it's those conversations around the selection of the platform, and those business analysis skills that we touched on before become really powerful. So what I did on day one was wrote out a list of not negotiables. What are the
Mm.
things that the platform that we were looking for, what did it absolutely need to do? Like hands down not negotiable. And the thing that I looked at very closely, so we did pilots with a few different providers, was also interrogating their product roadmaps. So, how transparent are they with their product roadmaps? Where are they headed? How do they partner with other organizations? but also thinking through what does their support look like. So we
Yeah.
partnered with somebody who has support in our time zone, which has been really powerful for us. And also right size. So they're not so small that they're going to fall over tomorrow, but they're not so large that they're frustrating to deal with.
Yeah.
So what am I working on at the moment is we last year expanded into South Australia, and
Congrats.
at the
That's good.
moment we're in the process of expanding into Sydney. So the
Oh,
actual tour builds now are very fast because we're using this platform. We're really
yep.
familiar with it. Our platform provider are amazing. We can spin up a new tour in the space of several days. So the actual product builds for us are really fast.
Yep.
Where it gets tricky with codeless is I get to use my favorite word, which is kludge. What you end
Okay.
up with is a series of things kludged together
Uh-huh.
um, in the back end to help things scale.
Mm.
And so what we're actually working through is some of the kludge stuff behind the scenes. So the actual product, we actually don't spend much time with the product. It's actually our distribution platform um, is through a major global player who will remain nameless. And they're very different experience because they're a major global player. We're only a
Yeah.
small fish.
Yeah.
Um, that makes our distribution, so how we actually sell our tours, more complex than it needs to be. So
Right.
what am I working on in short? Is boring behind the scenes stuff to make sure that our tour sales, so how we actually sell, collect money, and communicate with our customers, is completely robust before we add any more tours onto it.
Yep.
Because what we don't want to do is enter a new market with spaghetti behind the scenes.
Okay. No, that's good because I've just seen the opposite. Well, when I say the opposite, I've seen the horror story happen, and even as recent as this week. I don't want to give too much detail away, but basically, it was a bigger organization using a platform provider, and they've just stopped supporting the system after they've spent a bazillion dollars on development, and now they have to rescope and build again. Um, and in hindsight, like, I kind of go back to this all the time when I talk to non-technical founders who are pretty early stage, like get access to some kind of technical expertise when you're doing any kind of DD around anything. Because like you can build on Bubble. You can obviously, I think Aaron, you've got that kind of depth and experience to understand how to do DD on a platform provider, right? Whereas, so many people that are new to this wouldn't have that level of, or wouldn't even know what questions to ask. So, just coming back to, if you don't have access to it, just go and buy someone coffee or, pay for an hour of their time and just talk to them. The conversation is well worth versus not having, especially when you're feeling a little bit out of depth, in any of that situation.
Part of those day-to-day conversations that you touched on and why it's really important to catch up with someone if it's not something that you're familiar with is a lot of these platforms can start cheap and become very expensive.
Mm,
So it's having that ability to be able to understand that what you're being priced at early on might actually end up. I've heard some horror stories, as I'm sure you have too, of people who are on platforms that were probably more expensive than if they just custom developed something,
yep, yep.
because they didn't ask the questions up front about how their volume pricing worked. Because you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, unit price, that's all right. Um,
Right.
they're like those, particularly those larger platform providers. They're kind of like drug pushers. It's like, oh, you want to be on
Yeah.
this extra, you want to be on this extra tier, or you need this extra
Right.
feature. Um, yeah, so to definitely go in eyes wide open, and if it's not something that you're familiar with, is to ask someone to help you through that selection process.
Yeah, and even going back to the basics of finding a technical co-founder, like get a second opinion. If you're not sure, ask for help. Um, so yeah, I think at Morning Startup, was it Karina from Lightcard who told that story about they were using an external software provider, and then eventually she just bought the software and made it her
Creator
own.
from yeah, creator
From
from Industry One Card.
Industry
So
One, sorry, my bad. Yeah.
yeah, so what they've ended up with is something again that's super cool, super robust, but yeah, so she's got a great founder story. So for
Mm.
those who haven't seen it, check out the morning startup recordings. Because Karina's an absolute powerhouse. But what she talks through is did all the right founder things, which is start out codeless, test the solution, make sure that you're comfortable with it. And when she found out that that platform was going to be retired, that now forms part of one of her solutions. So it's pretty cool journey. The flip side is someone else in my network who I know developed a prototype on the back of a what was then they didn't know was going to be a retired Microsoft solution,
Oh,
and yeah, so they lost access to pretty much their entire product that had been validated
wow.
internationally, whole pile of things. So I think this is the whole thing is yeah, with every success story, there's risk regardless because I think that's the crux of a startup is you're testing everything. You're testing the market. You're testing the technology solution. Everything is risk.
Yep.
And it's just as a founder, you're constantly thinking through how are you going to manage that risk.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and if you need help, ask for it to help you think about, maybe there's a risk that you didn't think of as well. So, and speaking of morning startup, so do you want to talk a bit about that? Was it Scott that got you on there, Scott Glue, or how did that all come about? Like,
How,
how did you get
how did I?
involved?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
So,
did I?
sorry,
How did
let
I
me reframe.
introduce?
Morning Startup is the biggest meetup in Perth, in WA. There's over 7,000 members. They meet fortnightly, every 2 weeks in Perth CBD. And Erin is on the organizer panel. So,
Yeah, and also broadcast to the regions as well. So, and
yep,
the recording's available online, which is
right,
something
right.
that I'm really passionate about as someone who splits their time between Perth and the Wheat Belt,
Yes, of course.
is making sure that the resources are available to everyone. It was Scott did a pitch looking for extra volunteers
Oh, okay.
at Startup WA
Yep,
last year.
right.
And what really spoke to me was Scott was really passionate about increasing the diversity of the speakers and the programming, which is something near and dear to my heart. So I'd started when I first started out as a founder many years ago. I think it's a great landing place for people who are finding their way in the ecosystem,
Hmm.
but gravitated away from it when I found my tribe. But yeah, Scott being his wonderful humble self and being frank about the need to be more diverse in terms of their programming spoke to me. And
Mm.
then Nina coming along board, so another co-organizer at the same time, has been fantastic. And there's a few times lately where we've had to realize that we need to consider other types of balance. Because when we open up our networks, it's fantastic to see that between the four of us, so Dave Newman as well,
Yep,
we've got there's always more that can be done, but it's really cool to see the extension in the types of topics and conversations, and looking forward to some really really cool panels coming up as well over the next few months. So yeah, it's encouraging to see greater diversity in the startup ecosystem in the West.
Well, I do know, like, once you jumped on board, then, like, the speaker calendar filled up for the next 3 months. And it was impossible to get a spot for like 3 or 4 months. Wasn't that
Yeah, we're
right?
booked out. We're booked out until or November, but we always have
Wow.
so anyone who has a passion topic,
Yeah,
quite often speakers need to be rescheduled for all kinds of different reasons.
of course, of
So
course.
um, if there's anyone who's listening or watching, always hit one of us organisers up because we're always looking for someone to potentially add to a panel or slot in at the last minute. As I said, we do have a very small number of slots between now and the end of the year.
Yep,
But if there's something that you're passionate about that's relevant for the startup community, always come out and speak to us. And the things that we find get heaps and heaps of engagement are founder talks. That's the one, hearing founders talk about their journeys is always gets lots of views and bums on seats.
yep.
But as a founder wearing my founder hat, um, the more boring the better. So you think about some of those. We just touched on, we talked a lot about requirements and business analysis. Um, we've had lots of conversations about product ownership and product management and personas and those types of things, but the really boring things, like I know we've got some CFO stuff coming up, so how to
Oh,
better
cool.
work with the finance teams.
Yep,
There's lots of stuff in the archives around IP management. So what we try and do as much as possible is balance out the boring but important things that founders should be aware of, along with some of the fun, cool, interesting stuff. Particularly, there's a lot of interest in vibe coding and AI at the moment.
yep, yep. Yeah, well, I mean, you've got to ride every train that's kind of in the startup world, don't you? To attract a different crowd for each fort or each bi-weekly session. So, yeah, anyway, I did when I did your little spotlight post, I did link the morning startup link in the comments. But I'll definitely put that again in the when we create this post for the recording as well. So if you're not in Perth, you can watch it from anywhere in the world. They're all live streamed and they're all recorded as well on Perth Video. Yeah. So, what about like obviously joining the community? Has it taught you anything about building a community? Like, I know you've built communities before, but I mean, this is pretty broad now that you're kind of touching not only Perth, but like broader WA and I guess to some extent like Australia as well. Like, what do
That's
you, right, right.
yeah, I think my advice for founders when they think about community is to think about it as a series of concentric circles or a Venn diagram. Um, I think when I and the community's changed a lot in since I became a founder, but really thinking about there's a few different parts to it. So Morning Startup is a very generalist community, so it's a great place to kind of learn more about who's who in the zoo, those types of things. And it's a great place to have supporters and raving fans. So we have a lot of regular founders who come every fortnight, and I love hearing about how their different startups are progressing. So it's really beautiful. Particularly, one of the other things that's really powerful about Morning Startup is it is very, we're not selling you anything. We're not trying to get you into a program. We're not trying to sell you office space. We're just a group of volunteers who are really passionate about
Right,
founders
right.
and startups. So the vibes are very different. Whereas what I learned early on in my career is just to kind of think about what is, and that's actually part of why my business is called the Exchange Collective, is what is the exchange taking place? Who's the product here? What are we selling? So every kind of interaction that you have with a startup community, because everybody can be absolutely lovely, fantastic, welcoming, but just kind of being aware that there's lots of people who are running things for commercial reasons, and just kind of thinking about am I being sold something that I need?
Yeah.
Is this something that's right for me, my journey? So it's just to kind of go, yeah, cool, but what's the exchange that's happening here? So that's kind of the startup ecosystem. And I think what I see founders do is they get confused between the startup ecosystem and their customer ecosystem. So there's these
Oh,
great
right.
people here who
Yeah.
are, they're your raving fans. They're like, rah, girl, you got this, keep going. And it's fantastic to have those
Right.
people, like those advocates who are like, this is amazing, keep going. But that is not your customers. And that was one of the things that took me a long time to learn. And I
Yeah,
still
I
see
see.
people do it today, which is, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. And it's like, well, the startup community for most people is not your customer.
Yeah.
Might be connect me with someone who does X is a good ask for
Mm.
a startup vibe, but it's not, hey, buy my product.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas, so I have another fantastic tribe that has been growing over the last few years around hospitality, tourism, and travel.
Hmm.
And so I am part of a few different groups around that. And what being part of those groups really deal with is having that customer intimacy. So,
Yeah.
what's happening in the broader industry, what are the trends, those types of things. And that really drives our product development. Whereas my relationship with startup community, good vibes, inspiration, those types of things. And I think the third piece is also to think about who do you talk to behind closed doors. And I think Karina touched on it in the founder talk that she did, which is these public people who are fantastic, rah, rah, rah. That is exactly what we'll do. Are you feeling down? Yep, you got this, keep going. But sometimes you need to have behind closed door conversations about, girl, what are you doing? That's a hot mess. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that's a much smaller tribe or circle. Um, but I encourage all founders to think about those three. You got your raving fans who are going to support you no matter what. Um, Great to have a wine with and a, a commiseration. You've got your customer community, whatever that looks like for the product that you're developing. So where do you get that feedback about what's happening in your industry?
Hmm.
And then there's those people who you can have some real very robust conversations about your startup and whether you're headed in the right space, because you've got to absolutely 100% believe in what you do. But then that can create blind spots as well. So having those people
Yeah.
who are going to call you out and go, girl, you're 100% down there, but there's this thing over here that you really should think about.
Yep. Yep. No, that's good. That's great to, yeah, think about it in different facets as well, because yeah, many I've heard the thing, everyone's a cheerleader when you're pitching, but like outside of that, anyway. Um, yeah, and I kind of miss the morning startup vibe, obviously being away now, but I always thought there's a big opportunity here on the East Coast to do something. Yeah, it's still early days for me because I'm still building a name here in the East, but yeah, one day it would be definitely worth revisiting, I think, to do a more, I don't know if it's a central thing, but just something more entry level friendly.
Yeah,
Because yeah, I think Sydney, I don't think it has it. Um, but I could be wrong. Please correct me if I am wrong. Just because I've only been back home for the last 5 months. But yeah, there's a big opportunity to do something here. Well, I think in a lot of places. That's why Perth does it so well. And that's why, yeah, I see the benefit. Um, yeah, any questions from the audience? Feel free to ask. But I guess, we've covered a lot of stuff today. We've covered kind of how to work better with developers, a little bit around, waterfall versus agile and, when one might suit versus, in different contexts. We've talked a little bit about, obviously, your story and I guess some of the lessons learned around, you know, building the product, especially on a pre-built platform or like platform vendor, using a platform vendor, and then yeah, building some community through meetups. So yeah, we've covered some good things. Really appreciate your time. Doesn't look like there's any questions from the audience. Is there one final thought that you wanted to leave people with, whether it's around working with devs or the startup journey or building community?
I think it's have fun. So the and it's a reflection that I put on LinkedIn a few weeks ago that seemed to make the rounds that resonated with a lot of people. Which is,
Okay.
it feels strange at 3 a.m. when you're stressing about things, but to have a startup is a privilege. Not many people are, when you think about it, there's not many people who are in the position to be able to have a startup and do what we do for all different kinds of reasons. So it doesn't always feel like it when you're in the trenches
Yeah.
trying to get things done and trying to get traction and those types of things. But to step back from that and think about, how much of a privilege it is and to have fun with the journey. And I think we talk a lot about, sometimes a startup will be to earn,
Hmm.
sometimes it'll be to learn, but regardless of where your adventure takes you, is to step back and think about why did you start doing what you're doing, and to really connect with that purpose.
Yep. Okay, and guess what? There's one question that spawned out of all that. Um, so the question is there any tips on how to communicate properly with devs, especially if you're not from a similar background? So I assume that could come from many ways. That could be, you're technical versus non-technical. It could be, you're from fintech, you're from the financial industry, they're from ecom. Um, let's take the general view. If you want to share any
Yeah.
tips there.
So I'm going to give one of those awful "it depends" answers. But what we touched on at the start of the conversation was curiosity and really getting to understand the developer that you work with or developer team that you work with. Um, so like I make jokes about interpretive dance all the time, but I have worked
Mhm.
with development teams whose preference is to work in a really agile environment where we have stand ups every day. And I roll in and literally just wave my arms around and go, can it be like this? Um, and they'll go, yeah, cool. And then we'll roll in the next day and they will have built something that looks roughly like this, but
Mhm.
actually added some extra detail because they've been able to intuitively make sense of that.
Mhm.
Some developers absolutely love that way of working, whereas others absolutely hate it. So if that was one end of the spectrum, the absolute complete other end of the spectrum is particularly you touched on fintech is where you've got really strong testing and regulatory requirements. So some of that when you're working with a test team is to so I learnt to write a thing called Gherkin. So
Mhm.
if anyone's interested, check it out. And what Gherkin does is you're actually structuring your requirements as a series of test cases. So it's kind of a type of test driven development where everything that goes to the developers is really explicitly described exactly what success looks like. So you can go from it looks like this. Some developers will love that. Other developers want a really robust, just tell me what you want, lady. I don't want the wavy hands. Just tell me what you want. And so those types of things are sort of really structured. As I said, Gherkin is a good way. to frame those types of requirements. In the middle, because I think you probably remember, Matt, in the bad old days, a requirements document would be upwards of 200 pages, 300
Yep. I
pages.
remember that from
Um,
financial world days.
no one's got time for that. So what I've found works well in that. So what is the middle space is the idea of having user stories. So I want to show that, but with lots of support that sits behind that. So ideally wireframes that help visualize what you're talking about, but also what often gets missed is quite detailed acceptance criteria. So being really clear for a developer, not just, oh, okay, this one fuzzy thing, but what does good look like? What does success look like? And I find that process of sitting down and writing out the acceptance criteria. So, what tests are we going to run on this bad boy? Really help hone those conversations about what needs to build. It just kind of sets a light off for a few developers. But in short, be really clear with developer about what their preferred way of working is. Do they want it vague? Do they want it super complicated? Or do they want something in between? And how does that fit with the project that you're working on?
Yeah, yeah. And maybe I'll just add like the curiosity part, I think, is, yeah, number one. But I think you've also got to think about things from their point of view as well. You won't learn that straight away. That'll take time to build. Just like with working with anyone, especially when it's a different person with a different skill set who comes from a different background and has a different way of thinking and working and approaching situations. So it's kind of that trial and error and kind of give and take approach where you just generally over time can learn to build, if you're open-minded enough, I think, to build a better relationship with each other. So yeah, just that whole curiosity going in, not thinking that there's only one way to do something, is really important. And yeah, just like being a little bit more flexible with allowing them to come to terms with you and you also coming to terms with them as well. So yep, that's all I'll add. So hopefully that helps provide a little bit more input, Aditya, for your question. So yeah, we're past the hour. We've sorry to take up a little bit too much of your time, Erin, but it was all very invaluable. We'll share this recording shortly. It won't take me long to put that up, and then we'll chuck it out to the people that want to watch who couldn't make it today. So thanks again for your time, Erin. My name's Matt, Sales Manager at TechOn. We help you scale your team with remote devs. And Erin, if you want to get involved with Morning Startup or have a look at her stuff, you'll be able to see her profile on LinkedIn when I share the video, and I'll link it in the post that we do as well. Thanks again. Appreciate your time. Thanks to everyone for watching online, and hope to see you again shortly for the next episode. Bye for now. Cool.